My name is Michael Harris, and until recently my life was simple and straightforward. I lived in Chicago with my wife Emily and our two children, 7-year-old Lily and 5-year-old Ben. Our neighborhood was quiet, with smooth green lawns, smiling neighbors, and annual Independence Day barbecues. I worked in the financial sector, was involved in investments, and although my work required high concentration, it brought stability and confidence in the future. Every morning I woke up early, made coffee, and went for a run in the park nearby. It was my ritual, my way of collecting my thoughts before starting a new day. Emily usually got up later, but when I returned, she was already preparing breakfast for the children, and the kitchen was filled with the smell of freshly brewed coffee and toast. We ate together, discussing plans for the day: work, school, children's sections, meetings with friends. Everything was predictable, but our happiness lay in this predictable rhythm. After breakfast, I headed to the office while Emily took the kids to school. She worked in a publishing house, editing manuscripts, but her schedule was more flexible than mine. Sometimes she stayed at home, working remotely. Sometimes she went downtown to meet with authors and colleagues. Office work was predictable, but I liked it. My main responsibilities were analyzing investment markets, managing client portfolios, and negotiating with partners. Our team was friendly, and despite the routine, I found pleasure in bringing benefit to people, helping them ensure financial stability. In the evening, we gathered with the whole family for dinner. Lily talked about how her friend Maddie tried to learn how to make a wheel at school, and Ben enthusiastically shared stories about dinosaurs that he read in his favorite book. Emily smiled as she listened to them, and I felt the fatigue of the day dissolve in this warm family circle. After dinner, we watched cartoons or played board games together, and then I read fairy tales to the children before bed. This was the time I valued most. Our weekend passed in the usual rhythm: trips to the zoo, picnics in the park, meetings with friends. Sometimes we'd go out into the country to a house by the lake, where the kids could run around in the grass and Emily and I could enjoy the peace and quiet. Sometimes we left the children with their grandparents and spent romantic evenings together, remembering how we met, dreaming about the future. We made plans for the future, dreaming of how in a few years we would go on a trip to Europe when the children were older. I wanted to show Lily and Ben Paris, Venice, and London. We dreamed of trying real Italian pasta in a cozy restaurant on the coast and walking along the streets of ancient cities. It seemed to us that there were many more years of the same measured and happy life ahead. I never thought about how easily the established world could collapse. It seemed to me that the stability we had built was indestructible. But as it turns out, life can take unexpected turns, and even the strongest foundations can turn out to be fragile. At that moment, I did not know that ahead, with moving to a new house, changes awaited us that would change everything. Buying a new home is always accompanied by excitement, joy, and, of course, a little stress. We thought about moving for a long time, but when we saw this house, we realized that this was exactly what we needed. It was in a picturesque area on the outskirts of Chicago, where there was less bustle, more greenery, and the schools for the children were among the best in the city. "Dad, will I have my own room?" Lily asked, holding my hand as we approached our future home for the first time. "Of course, honey," I smiled. "Now you and Ben will have your own room, and you can decorate it as you want." The house was spacious, bright, with large windows and a cozy courtyard. On the ground floor, there was a spacious kitchen, a living room with a fireplace and my office, and upstairs there were 3 bedrooms and a playroom for the children. But what captivated us the most was the backyard. There was a large green lawn where children could run, play, and have picnics. Tall trees grew next to the lawn, and a small stream flowed behind the house, which made this place truly magical. "Mom, can we get a puppy?" Ben jumped happily, looking around the yard. "We'll see how you behave," Emily laughed. "But I think this house is perfect for a dog." The move was eventful. Boxes, furniture, endless trips to stores for missing things. The children ran around the empty rooms, already discussing where everything would be. "Lily, let's put your table by the window. This will make it easier for you to draw," Emily suggested. "Yes, Mom." I also want shelves for books and little lights around the bed, my daughter said enthusiastically. Ben, in turn, decided that he needed a wall to paint on. Dad, can I draw on the wall? Just a little bit. Let's make a special board for your masterpieces, I suggested, and my son nodded happily. Over the next few days, we continued to settle in, giving the house character and soul. Emily, with her usual care and attention, selected curtains that were light and airy for the living room, thick and warm for the bedrooms. She chose each carpet so that its soft pile would feel pleasant to the feet, and the lamps so that their warm glow filled the rooms with coziness, creating an atmosphere of calm and comfort. In the meantime, I took care of the garage, turning it into a convenient place to work. Neat shelving appeared on the walls where I placed my tools, and in one corner there was a large work desk. There was a slight smell of wood and machine oil in the air, the smell of a space where something new is being created. The children enthusiastically participated in the process, chatting and laughing merrily. They arranged books on the shelves in the living room, sometimes arguing about which should go first and which should go next to each other. In the nursery, they happily laid out toys, filling the room with life and cheerful voices. It seemed that the house itself responded to their revival, becoming even warmer and more welcoming. When most of the work was done, we allowed ourselves a break. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the trees, filling the sky with shades of pink and gold, we all gathered on the veranda. A light evening breeze rustled the curtains on the windows, and the air was filled with the aroma of freshly cut grass and the distant smell of smoke from a neighbor's fireplace. Lily, sitting comfortably next to me, hugged me with her small arms and, pressing her cheek to my shoulder, quietly whispered, "Dad, this house is like something out of a fairy tale." I smiled, looking at the last rays of the sun flickering on the horizon. There was truth in her words. "Because we made him like this," I answered, gently squeezing her warm palm. We decided to celebrate our housewarming with a warm family picnic in the yard. The day turned out to be warm and sunny. A light breeze rustled the treetops, filling the air with the aroma of fresh grass and flowering bushes. I busied myself with the barbecue, sizzling the meats and vegetables onto the grill, while Emily, with her usual care, prepared a refreshing lemonade with lemon wedges and mint leaves, which had an invigorating citrus aroma. Children, full of energy, ran merrily across the lawn, their ringing laughter echoing throughout the yard. Lily danced around with Ben, and then they settled down under an old oak tree and began to build themselves a secret refuge from blankets and pillows. Sometimes a neighbor's cat would come running to them, watching them play with curiosity and then lazily stretch out in the shade. The atmosphere was light and happy, as if the air itself was saturated with joy. We laughed, enjoying every moment, and a feeling of comfort and togetherness enveloped us in an invisible but strong connection. When the last box was unpacked, the furniture was finally put away, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen. Emily and I finally allowed ourselves to exhale. "We did it," she said, sitting down next to me on the soft sofa in the living room. Her voice sounded with a slight tinge of fatigue, but joy shone in her eyes. I hugged her, pressing her closer, feeling the warmth of her shoulder, and looked around. Our presence was already felt in every corner of this house: photographs on the walls, books on the shelves, toys carelessly left on the carpet. All this has become part of our life. "This is our home now," she repeated with a smile. I nodded, knowing that we had many years of happiness ahead of us in this place full of light, laughter, warmth, and many small moments that would make this home truly like home. Life in the new house went on as usual, but over time I began to notice small changes in Emily's behavior. Previously, we discussed family issues together and made decisions together, but now more and more often she takes the initiative without asking my opinion. These were minor details, but it is these little things that make up everyday life. One of the first such moments was when I returned from work to find a new sofa in the living room. It was a beautiful, stylish piece of furniture that fit perfectly into the decor, but I had no idea we were buying it. "Have you seen it?" Emily asked proudly, waving her hand towards the renovated living room. "Yes, the sofa is good." But when did we decide to buy it? I asked, slightly puzzled. Oh, well, you yourself said that our old one from the previous house was already leaking. I found a great deal and couldn't pass up the chance, she replied with a shrug. After I discovered that there were new shelves in the kitchen. I was used to us discussing such things beforehand, but Emily didn't even mention it. She just took a drill and a hammer and installed them herself while I was at work. I thought it wouldn't take long, she said, putting away her tools. Well, really, I can do such things too, right? There was nothing wrong with that, but it seemed strange to me that now she didn't ask me like before. Even the choice of children's activities became solely her initiative. Ben suddenly started taking swimming lessons, and Lily joined a drama club, which I found out about after the fact. Emily, why didn't you tell me? I asked when she told me about their new activities. Because I'm sure they'll like it, she answered calmly. You don't mind, do you? We want them to develop. I wasn't against it, but I still wanted to be aware of such decisions. However, I decided not to focus on it. After all, she acted for the good of the family. One day, returning home after a long day of work, I had barely crossed the threshold when I heard the cheerful laughter of children coming from the backyard. Curiosity got the better of me, and I headed there without even having time to take off my jacket. When I went out into the yard, I was greeted by an unexpected sight. In the center of the lawn, there was a new wooden swing with strong ropes neatly attached to a strong crossbar. Nearby, as if from a fairy tale, a small wooden house with tiny windows, carved shutters, and a miniature staircase leading to the porch appeared. It all looked as if a fairy tale had settled here. I stopped in surprise, looking around the new structure. Just a couple of days ago, there was only green grass in this place, but now children were running around, climbing into the house, sliding down a small slide and swinging on the swings with joyful cries. Did you order this? I asked, still not believing my eyes. Emily stood a little further away, watching the children play with a warm smile. There was a glass of lemonade in her hands, and the breeze slightly moved a strand of hair that had escaped from her hairstyle. Yes, she nodded, pleased with my reaction. The children have been dreaming about this for a long time. I thought it would make them happier. I ran my hand over the smooth wooden surface of the house, appreciating the quality of the work. Everything looked reliable, strong as if built to last. But why didn't you tell me again? I asked, frowning slightly. I could install everything myself, and we wouldn't overpay for installation. Emily shrugged slightly and looked at me with a soft smile. I just wanted to make a surprise, she said with a slight guilt in her voice. I sighed, but couldn't help but smile. Looking at the faces of our children beaming with happiness, I realized that this surprise was truly a success. The house and swing became for them not just a new toy, but a small magical world full of adventures, secrets, and endless games. And how could I be angry with Emily for making our children happier? All these moments added up to a new, gradually emerging picture of our life. The house was filled with comfort, the children laughed, their joyful cries were heard in the yard, and in the evenings the whole family gathered on the veranda, watching the sunset. But deep down I began to notice changes. If previously Emily and I discussed every detail, making decisions together, now more and more often she acted independently. This was not something bad, on the contrary, she took care of the house with such love and attention that her gentle hand could be felt in every corner. She thought about everything, choosing cozy blankets for the living room, making sure there was enough light in the children's rooms, making sure that Ben and Lily always had their favorite treats. She made our life more comfortable, warmer, and richer. And yet, sometimes I wanted to go back to how it was before, when we made decisions together, discussed, argued, sought compromises. I didn't feel disconnected, but sometimes I felt like I was becoming less and less a part of these small decisions that add up to create our common home. One evening at dinner, as the candles on the table flickered softly, creating a cozy atmosphere, I decided to talk about it. We are partners, right? I asked, putting my fork down and looking at Emily. She looked up at me, reflecting the warm light of the lamp, and smiled slightly. Of course, she answered softly. It's just that sometimes it seems to me that it's more convenient." She thought for a moment and looked around the kitchen, where everything stood in its place, as if every item had been carefully thought out and chosen with love. "But if you don't like it," she continued, gently covering my hand with hers, "I will discuss more with you, I promise." I nodded, but realized that changes had already happened. Perhaps it's just part of life. Perhaps there will be new roles in a new home. After several months spent in the new house, our life returned to normal. The children settled into school, and after school activities, the house was fully equipped, and the days passed calmly and measuredly. But I noticed that Emily was becoming more and more thoughtful. She was always active, loved her job, and now, when worries about moving and settling down were left behind, she began to miss something important. One day at dinner, she spoke about it out loud. "I think I want to go back to work," she said, looking at me with slight uncertainty, as if she was expecting my reaction. Before moving, she worked at a large publishing house, where she felt in demand, but with our move, the journey to the office became too long, and the format of remote work did not suit her. Now that the children have become accustomed to the new city, and the house has become cozy and lived in, Emily wanted something more than just taking care of the family. "I think it's a good idea," I replied, smiling. She sighed with relief and immediately began her search with enthusiasm. In the evenings, when the children were already asleep, she studied advertisements, updated her resume, and selected the most suitable vacancies. The first few weeks were a series of interviews, but finding a job was not so easy. Some offers did not suit her conditions, others required full-time work, which would mean less time with the children, and she did not want that. But one evening, everything changed. Returning from the supermarket, Emily was walking along the main street of our neighborhood when her eye caught a neatly framed advertisement in the window of a law firm. Harrison and Clark. The advert was about a secretary vacancy working with documents, organizing meetings, communicating with clients. But the main thing is that the office was only 20 minutes from home, which fit perfectly into her plans. When she returned home, her eyes shone with enthusiasm. "I found something interesting," she said, placing the bags on the kitchen table. That same evening, she sent in her resume, carefully crafting a cover letter. The next day, while we were having breakfast, her phone vibrated, an invitation to an interview arrived. "It seems I have a chance," she smiled, sliding her finger across the screen. I saw how the spark lit up again in her gaze, the same one that she had when she talked about her favorite job. And at that moment, I realized, for her, this is not just a search for a job, but a step towards something important new, a step that made her happier. The interview was successful. Atmosphere in the office Harrison and Clark Emily immediately liked. The stylish interior, strict but cozy, and the discreet, business-like atmosphere. The firm's management was looking for an organized, responsible, and friendly employee who would not only maintain order in the documentation, but also help lawyers in their daily work. Emily's experience in publishing turned out to be her great advantage. After all, it required attentiveness, the ability to work with papers and keep hundreds of small details under control. When she returned home after the meeting, her eyes shone with delight. "I got the job," she exclaimed, running into the kitchen, where I was just putting the kettle on. I turned around and caught her in a joyful embrace with a smile. "Congratulations. When do you start?" "Next Monday," she answered, catching her breath a little. "I will have a convenient schedule. I will be able to pick up my children from school, and they also have a very friendly team." She spoke quickly, with enthusiasm, and I could see how this decision filled her with energy. Her voice contained the joy of a person who had found something important that he had been looking for so long. Before her first day at work, Emily decided to update her wardrobe. If previously her usual look was cozy jeans, soft sweaters, and comfortable sneakers, now she approaches the choice of clothes with special care. Elegant skirts, formal blouses made of light fabrics, and several impeccably fitting business suits appeared in her closet. She even bought several pairs of stylish shoes, classic pumps with chunky heels, and elegant ankle boots. On Sunday evening, when the house was quiet and the children were asleep, Emily stood in front of the mirror in our bedroom, assessing her new look. She wore a light gray suit with a fitted jacket and neat lapels, and a white silk blouse underneath. Her hair was pulled back into a stylish, but slightly messy bun, and light makeup emphasized the sparkle in her eyes. "How do you like it?" she asked, spinning in front of the mirror and slightly adjusting the sleeves of her jacket. I held my breath for a second, amazed at how different she looked. There was confidence in her, new energy, and easy, subtle determination. "You look incredible," I answered honestly, without looking away. "This is a completely different style, but it suits you." Emily smiled, looked at herself again, and ran her hand over the smooth fabric of her jacket. "I think this is exactly what I need," she said quietly, but there was confidence in her voice. I knew that this was not just a job for her. This was a new stage, a new role that gave her a sense of independence and meaning, and I was proud of her. Emily's first day of work was a real challenge. In the morning, while she was getting ready, I noticed how nervous she was, although she tried to hide it behind her usual smile. She checked the documents in her bag several times, straightened her hair in the mirror, and carefully examined her suit, as if trying to make sure that everything was perfect. "You can handle it," I said, walking her to the door. She took a deep breath, straightened her back, and nodded. "Yes, I can handle it." When she returned home in the evening, she literally glowed with joy. "Everything went just great," she said excitedly, arranging the documents in her bag. "The team is excellent. The work is interesting. Of course, I'm still figuring out the intricacies, but they explain everything to me, and it's incredibly exciting." There was real inspiration in her voice. Over time, she completely fell into the new rhythm. Every morning became a special ritual for her. She woke up with a slight smile, cheerfully put on her perfectly fitting business suit, carefully straightened her hair, and confidently left the house, grabbing a cup of freshly brewed coffee along the way. Her movements became more confident, her voice was firmer, and her posture was straighter. In the evenings, when we were having dinner or drinking tea in the living room, she would talk animatedly about her day at the office. She shared stories about her colleagues, how she helped with important documents, how she coordinated meetings with clients, and how respected lawyers were for her work. "Can you imagine? Today I organized the entire archive in such a way that even the managing partner of the company said that we now have an ideal order," she said proudly. I saw how this work changed her. She didn't just become busier, she blossomed before our eyes. An inner strength appeared in her, which was reflected in her every movement, in every word. Now she not only made decisions at home, but also acted confidently in any situation. She learned to quickly understand complex issues, organize processes, and achieve results. It's been half a year since Emily started working at Harrison and Clark. She clearly enjoyed her work, and this was evident in her eyes, which lit up when she talked about the affairs of the office. However, along with this, small but tangible changes began to occur in our family life. Previously, we had breakfast together in the morning, discussing plans for the day, but now Emily was often in a hurry, finishing her coffee as she went. "I'll be late today, we have a lot of work," she said, throwing on her jacket. "Will you even have time to pick up Ben?" I clarified. "No, please, do it yourself. I'll try to come early, but I can't promise." I nodded, understanding that her new rhythm of life required changes, but still it was unusual. In the evening, the three of us had dinner with the children, and even when Emily returned, her thoughts seemed to be somewhere far away. "How was your day?" I asked. "Oh, we had such a crazy day," she perked up. "Just imagine, one client forgot to sign the documents, and I had to run after him throughout the building." I smiled, rejoicing at her enthusiasm, but deep down I felt that our usual family structure was beginning to change. The children also noticed the changes. Ben, accustomed to spending the evenings with his mother, now came to me more often while she sorted out documents or answered letters from colleagues. "Mom is busy, right?" he asked one day, settling down next to me on the sofa. "Yes, but she loves you, she just has a lot of work," I answered, trying to smooth the situation over. Lily, more mature and observant, also did not ignore this. Dad, it seems to me that Mom has become something different. She hardly plays with us. I sighed, realizing that I wasn't the only one noticing the changes. Emily had done nothing wrong, but her focus was now on her career. She became more collected, organized, but also more detached from us. She was also busy on weekends. If before we went to the park together or had picnics, now she either stayed late at the office or worked from home. I need to prepare a report by Monday, she said one Saturday, sitting down with her laptop in the living room. You promised that we would go to the zoo, Lily reminded. Let's move it to next week, Emily suggested. Lily looked at me and sighed quietly. Ben was also disappointed. All this accumulated. I understood that Emily was not to blame, but our family began to lose the warmth that we had. Her phone was constantly ringing. Her colleagues were texting her even late at night. Sometimes she went into another room to talk, and I noticed how tiredness was reflected on her face. One evening, I decided to talk to her. Emily, how are you feeling? You work so much. Are you tired? She looked at me with slight surprise. Yes, it can be hard, but I like it. I feel like I'm growing, you know. I nodded. I'm happy for you. It seems to me that you've been spending less time with us. The children are bored. She lowered her eyes, as if realizing this for the first time. You're right. I just need to get used to everything. I will try to be with you more. Previously, when we went to bed, Emily herself reached out to me, pressed herself against me, and began our intimate ritual. We had a stable and passionate sex life, not too often, but always filled with tenderness and understanding. Now everything has changed. She began to go to bed earlier than me or fell asleep as soon as she touched the pillow. One day I gently kissed her neck, hoping for a response, but she only muttered tiredly, Sorry, I'm very tired. Let's do it tomorrow. But tomorrow never came. I tried not to think about it, not to succumb to irritation, but I couldn't help but notice that this area of our life was gradually fading away. Preparations for the corporate event at Harrison and Clark began long before the event itself. Emily spent a long time choosing a dress, going through options between an elegant classic style and something more vibrant. She settled on a dark blue satin off-the-shoulder dress that showed off her figure. New high heels completed the look. When she left the bedroom, I involuntarily held my gaze. Well, how do you like it? She asked with a slight smile. You look amazing, I answered sincerely, although deep down I felt something strange. She had changed lately, and now that I saw her beaming so confidently, the feeling only intensified. The evening before going out, Emily twirled in front of the mirror for a long time, fixing her makeup and hair. Her hair was styled in neat waves, and she had a new shade of lipstick on her lips that I hadn't noticed before. She looked great, but something about her new appearance made me slightly uneasy. There was a festive atmosphere at the party. The spacious hall was decorated with garlands. The soft light of the lamps created a cozy but solemn atmosphere. Guests were served delicious snacks and live music. Emily immediately greeted her colleagues, and I followed her, becoming familiar with her surroundings. Michael, this is David, our senior lawyer. Emily introduced me to a tall man with a confident posture. It's a pleasure, Michael, David said, extending his hand. His gaze was direct and attentive. Emily often talks about you. I hope it's good, I joked, shaking his hand. Only the best, he answered with a slight smile. Over the course of the evening, I met different people and listened to conversations about legal matters of which I understood little. Emily communicated easily, laughed. Her eyes shone, she was in her element. I noticed how one of her colleagues, the same David, caught her eye several times. There was some subtle moment between them that made me feel uneasy. When Emily was distracted talking to other colleagues, I watched her closely. She was laughing, her gestures were casual, but I couldn't help but notice how from time to time her gaze stayed on David a little longer than on the others. He, in turn, also looked intrigued. It wasn't obvious flirting, but I couldn't shake the feeling of some kind of hidden connection. At some point, when Emily went to get a glass of wine, I approached David. Great evening, I remarked. Yes, such events help you relax after hard work, he answered. I nodded, watching Emily return, slightly adjusting a strand of her hair. A smile flashed across her face as she met David's gaze again. I sat next to Emily at dinner, but felt she was a little distant. Conversations at the table were casual, colleagues told jokes, shared stories from work, but I found myself watching her most of the time. Was it my jealousy, or was I really noticing something important? As the evening ended, I helped Emily put on her coat. On the way home, she was silent, looking happy, but tired. "Did you like it?" I asked, breaking the silence. "Yes, it was fun. Thank you for coming with me," she smiled warmly. I smiled back, but the uneasy feeling did not disappear. Maybe I was just jealous. Maybe this is all just a figment of my imagination. But a feeling of anxiety has already settled in the depths of consciousness. As Emily became busier at work, I had to take on many of the household responsibilities that she used to do. In the early days, it seemed easy. Cook breakfast, get the kids ready for school, pick Ben up after school, help Lily with her homework. But the deeper I immersed myself in this rhythm, the more I realized how big Emily's role was in our family. Previously, I saw only the external side of her worries: cooking, washing, keeping the house in order. But now I realized how much invisible work was hidden behind it. Ben needed constant attention. He wanted to play, asked me to read books to him, tell him about what happened at school, and expected me to be the same enthusiastic listener that Mom always was. Lily, in turn, needed support and advice. She didn't just need to be tested in math, she wanted to discuss how to behave with her friends, what topic to choose for a school project, what outfit to wear for the upcoming holiday. Emily used to do this. Now, every day I learned not only to be a father, but also to become the person who meets all the needs of children. This turned out to be more difficult than I thought. Sometimes I didn't have enough patience, sometimes I felt helpless, but at the same time I noticed how they and I were becoming closer. Ben came up to me more and more often just to talk. Lily shared her experiences, which she had previously trusted only to her mother. I also noticed that they missed Emily, although they didn't say it out loud. This was especially evident in the evenings, when at dinner her place remained empty, and her usual voice did not sound in the house, telling about the past day. One evening, when I was helping Lily put out her textbooks, she suddenly asked, "Dad, will Mom be back on time today?" She said it would be late. They were having corporate gatherings at the office, I answered, trying not to sound irritated in my voice. "There weren't any like this before," Ben muttered quietly. I looked at him. There was no condemnation in his words, only childish bewilderment. Indeed, before, Emily always rushed home after work and tried to spend the evenings with us. But now Friday evenings increasingly turned into her working time, and we were left alone. At first, I didn't attach any importance to it. Well, it happens: work, meetings, discussions. I recalled how I myself stayed late in the office when we had urgent matters. But then I realized that corporate gatherings had become a tradition. Every time it's the same: "I'll be a little late. Don't wait for me. Go to bed without me." One day I decided to write her a message. "Are you far away?" The answer did not come immediately. "I'll be there soon, don't worry." That's all. No explanations, nothing extra. That night, when she returned, I still asked her a question. "How was your night?" "Great," she replied, taking off her coat. "We had a good time, discussed business, and just relaxed after a difficult week." "Who was it?" I asked, casually but carefully. "Yes, all colleagues." I nodded, trying to hide the surging wave of emotions. Something inside me sank in alarm, but I forced myself not to react. Maybe I'm just being picky, maybe I'm just tired and looking for problems where there are none. But with each new Friday, my anxiety grew. More and more often, I noticed that Emily spent more time choosing an outfit before leaving. Her perfume became a little more noticeable, and her smile was somehow different, as if she was no longer here mentally. The sex life between us was already becoming less and less frequent, but now, even when I managed to create the right moment, Emily seemed less emotional, less involved. She answered, but without the same fire, without that easy game that used to make our nights special. It was as if she was fulfilling her marital duty, nothing more. It seemed to me that a wall had grown between us, and I did not know how to destroy it. I didn't want to think about the bad, attributing everything to fatigue, stress, workload. But everything changed one morning when I, as usual, was going to wash my clothes. While sorting out the basket, I came across something that made me freeze. Among her things was a new set of underwear, lacy, delicate, obviously expensive. It was completely different from her usual comfortable loungewear. But the main thing is that I have never seen it on her. Previously, when Emily bought something like this, she would give me intriguing shows. I waited for the children to fall asleep, put on a new item, and heated up the situation so much that I wanted to rip it off right that very second. It was her way of showing that she wanted me. She loved this ritual, playing with it, teasing it, and then giving herself completely. And now I didn't even know when or why she bought it. I carefully took the kit in my hands, feeling my heart begin to beat faster. There was still a slight scent of her perfume on the fabric. Thoughts were spinning in my head. Maybe she just decided to update her wardrobe and didn't have time to show me. Maybe she was waiting for a special occasion. Or I didn't allow myself to think any further. I understood that if I started delving into these guesses, I wouldn't be able to stop. I could ask her directly, but what difference would it make? She would say that she bought it just because, or didn't have time to wear it yet. I knew how she knew how to evade answers and turn the conversation to something else. I didn't want to spoil her mood, especially since we were having a family barbecue the day after tomorrow in honor of her birthday. Her colleagues were invited. The children were already waiting for this day, and it would be unwise to make a scene before such an event. I carefully folded the laundry back, took a deep breath, and closed the washing machine. I tried to think logically, but an unpleasant feeling was already flaring up inside. For now, I decided to just observe. Maybe I'm stressing myself out. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Perhaps the explanation will be simple and harmless. But something inside told me that this was the first alarm bell. That evening, when Emily returned home, I watched her more closely than usual. She seemed tired, but happy. The evening passed quietly, and I tried not to show my thoughts. But even when we got into bed, when I tried to pull her towards me, she just stroked my hand and whispered, "Honey, I'm very tired. How about tomorrow?" I said nothing, just nodded. But inside everything shrank. Tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, in a week. The next day I watched Emily all morning. She behaved as usual, but something new appeared in her gaze, some barely noticeable impatience. She would receive messages on her phone and read them with a slight smile, but immediately turn away as if she didn't want me to see her reaction. Emily's birthday began with the joyful voices of children filling the house with warm, sparkling happiness. The air was saturated with the aroma of freshly baked toast and a slight scent of vanilla. Probably Lily and Ben had sneaked into the kitchen and were cooking something there. They carefully prepared for this day, bending over a table with markers and glue in the evening, creating cards, which they now carefully clutched in their hands. The children, trying to be quiet, opened the bedroom door, but their enthusiastic whispers and the tramp of their bare feet still woke Emily up. She slowly opened her eyes and, seeing the shining faces of her son and daughter, immediately smiled. "Mommy, happy birthday!" Ben exclaimed joyfully, unable to restrain himself, and instantly jumped onto the bed. The soft pillows sagged under his weight, and the blanket shifted to the side. "We love you very much," Lily added, holding out her card with neat designs of hearts and flowers. Emily laughed, feeling her heart fill with warmth. She hugged the children tightly, inhaling their familiar smell, a mixture of baby shampoo and sweet milk cookies that they probably ate secretly before bed. I stood in the doorway watching this scene, and despite the anxiety of the last few days, I couldn't help but smile. It was as if time stood still at that moment, allowing everyone to forget about any worries. "And this is from me," I said, taking a step forward and handing Emily a small, neatly packaged box tied with a soft lavender ribbon. She curiously unwrapped the package, and her fingers slid along the smooth surface of the elegant bracelet. The graceful pattern reflected the soft morning light, adding even more sophistication to the decoration. It took me a long time to choose it, knowing how Emily loves such things elegant, discreet, but with a special meaning. Michael, she whispered, her voice sounded warm, but there was something elusive in it. She raised her eyes to me, full of gratitude, but somewhere deep, at the very bottom of this look, there was a shadow hiding, reminiscent of something unsaid, unresolved. I felt it instantly. Something still remained between us, like an invisible barrier, light as fog, but noticeable enough to disturb. After a hearty and warm breakfast filled with the laughter of children and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, preparations for the barbecue began. A light breeze filtered through the windows, bringing with it the smell of grass and the promise of a sunny day. The day promised to be carefree, but anxiety still smoldered inside me, which I tried to drown out with the usual bustle. Ben and I went to the store to buy meat and vegetables. The son, pleased with his responsible mission, chatted animatedly, waving a shopping list that Lily had scribbled with a pink felt-tip pen. In the supermarket, he enthusiastically selected the juiciest tomatoes, meticulously turning them in his hands like a real expert. I nodded automatically, assenting to his reasoning about which vegetables are best suited for grilling, but my thoughts kept slipping into another direction. Emily stayed home, and I knew Lily had happily volunteered to help her prepare snacks. In their hands, the kitchen has probably already turned into a chaos of chopped vegetables, spilled spices, and endless conversations. Lily always loved moments like these, the chance to spend time with her mom, tinkering with something in the kitchen. But despite the cozy family atmosphere, something in Emily's behavior alarmed me. I noticed this even at breakfast, but now that I left, the anxiety only intensified. Her attention seemed distracted, as if she was mentally somewhere else. She smiled automatically, checked her phone, quickly responded to messages, and again plunged into her thoughts. This was not like my Emily. As guests began to arrive, the mood became lively. Emily's colleagues were friendly, outgoing, and I noticed how she glowed in their company. She laughed, told stories, her gestures were free and easy, but none of this was addressed to me. I felt like an outsider, although this was our common home, our common holiday. "Michael, where are the skewers?" she asked, interrupting my thoughts. I quickly got ready and brought everything I needed, trying to be distracted by small matters. But the uneasy feeling grew. I noticed that she often exchanged glances with David. They kept crossing glances and exchanging half smiles, as if they had some kind of common understanding. At first, I tried not to focus on it, but then I realized that she had barely addressed me the entire evening. At the height of the evening, I noticed that they had moved to the side, away from everyone, and were having an animated conversation. David said something quietly to her, and she laughed, tilting her head. Their postures were relaxed, trusting, and I found myself clenching my fists. I watched them, but could not approach them. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if I wanted to hear the answer. Maybe it's just friendship, easy flirting communication that leads nowhere. Maybe I'm stressing myself out. But something in their looks, in their body language, told me that there was something more between them. "Dad, aren't you eating?" Lily asked quietly, coming up to me. I blinked and looked at her. The daughter's small face looked worried. "Of course, honey, I'll grab a plate now," I said, trying to smile. But inside, I no longer had any appetite. I decided not to make a scene or make any sudden movements. But now I knew for sure that we needed to talk. I needed to understand what was happening. And most importantly, did I still have a chance to fix something? The next morning, the house was unusually quiet. Lily and Ben went to visit their grandparents. They had been waiting for this for a long time. Lily excitedly talked about how they would go to the park, and Ben dreamed of Grandma's pancakes with maple syrup. I helped them get ready, making sure they took everything they needed: a change of clothes, toys, books. "Dad, will we stay with Grandma until evening?" Lily clarified, buttoning her jacket. "Yes, honey, don't worry. Have a good time," I replied, kissing her forehead. As the car disappeared around the bend, I took a deep breath. The house was left only for the two of us. Now I had no reason to postpone this conversation. For several days, I had been meaning to say everything that had accumulated, but either I did not find the right moment or I was afraid of what I would hear in response. Emily was sitting in the living room with a cup of coffee. She looked tired but calm. I sat down opposite her, trying to find the right words. "We need to talk," I began, looking at her carefully. She slowly looked up, her face remaining expressionless. "About what?" she asked coldly. I clenched my fingers. "About you. About us. About what's happening." She took a sip of coffee as if contemplating her answer. There was tension in the room. "Nothing is happening, Michael," she said evenly. "You are again looking for a problem where there is none." "Emily, don't. I saw how you interact with David. I saw how you laugh with him, how you look at him. You're moving away from me. I can feel it." Her fingers squeezed the cup. She looked away. "You understand everything wrong. We're just colleagues. I'm not going to make excuses for being friendly." Friendly. I smiled bitterly. "When was the last time you looked at me the way you looked at him? When was the last time we just had a heart-to-heart? I don't know what's between you, but I know one thing: you're no longer here. You're not with me." She took a deep breath, her irritation becoming more and more noticeable. "You're pushing yourself too hard, Michael. It's all in your head." I felt a wave of anger and powerlessness rise within me. She didn't answer, didn't explain, didn't try to understand me. She simply rejected everything I said. "So it's all in my head. Fine. Then tell me honestly, are you happy? Do you even want to be here with me?" Emily was silent. Her lips trembled, but no words came. She just sat and looked into the cup, as if there was an answer to all questions. "You don't even want to talk to me," I continued more quietly. "We used to have conversations, plans, and dreams, and now you act like nothing is happening, as if everything was fine. But that's not true." She finally looked up at me. There was no anger in them, but I no longer saw love there either. Only fatigue. "Michael, I don't want to discuss this now," she said evenly. "I'm tired. Let's not." "Shall we not? Let's just ignore everything as if nothing happened?" I sighed, running my hand over my face. "We won't solve anything like that." "What do you want to decide? You came up with everything yourself. You convinced yourself of something that doesn't exist." Her voice became sharper. "Maybe we should just leave everything as it is." I fell silent. She didn't argue, didn't get angry, didn't make excuses. But there was something final in these words. It was as if she had already made a decision a long time ago. Only she didn't tell me. I realized that this conversation would not give me answers. It just confirmed what I've been feeling for the last few months. We were sitting in the same room, but there was a gap between us. After talking with Emily, I had no doubt that something was really going on, and I needed to find out the truth. That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time, replaying in my head everything that had happened over the past weeks. And suddenly, a thought occurred to me. If I can't get answers from Emily, maybe I can learn something from another person who is somehow connected to this. I opened social media and started looking for David's wife. I vaguely remembered her name was Rachel. A few minutes later, I found her profile. In the photographs, she looked like a confident woman with an ordinary but well-groomed appearance. There was character in her eyes. She clearly knew her worth. In addition, judging by the information in her profile, she was the daughter of an influential businessman in our city, which added to her status. I looked at her photographs for a long time before I decided to write. "Hello, Rachel. My name is Michael. I'm Emily's husband. She works with your husband. I think we should talk." I wasn't sure how she would react. Perhaps he will ignore it. Perhaps he will simply delete the message. But half an hour later, the answer came. "What exactly do you want to talk about, Michael?" I dialed the number, not wanting to discuss this in a text message. She answered after the second ring. "I'm listening to you." "Thank you for answering. The fact is that lately I have been worried about my wife's behavior, and I think you might feel similar." There was a break. "Are you saying that David and Emily—" Her voice was calm, but there was tension in it. "I don't know for sure," I admitted honestly. "But it seems to me that there is something between them that you and I don't know about." Rachel was silent for a few seconds. Then she sighed. Let's meet and discuss this in person. I think I have something to tell you too. We agreed to meet in a small, cozy coffee shop in the city center. When I arrived, she was already sitting at a table by the window, slowly stirring her coffee. Her confidence was noticeable in every movement, but there was a hint of wariness in her eyes. Thank you for agreeing to meet, I said, sitting down opposite. My pleasure. I also wanted to talk, she answered, looking at me with interest. Let's be honest. What exactly is bothering you? I took a deep breath and began to talk about what I noticed in Emily's behavior, about her delays, strange glances with David, about emotional distance. Rachel listened carefully, without interrupting. Then she nodded. I don't like it either. David began to behave differently. He returns home late, often says that he has meetings, and on the weekend urgent work suddenly appears. And yes, I also noticed how he looks at your wife. But I hoped that it was just my jealousy, and I couldn't think that it could be Emily. She took another sip of coffee and leaned forward a little. Michael, I'm not a stupid woman. All my life I lived surrounded by people who were used to hiding something. And my father always said, if you doubt someone, there is a reason for it. I don't want to leave this unattended. Her words sounded firm, but there was tension in her eyes. I realized that she, too, was struggling with inner doubts. What do you propose? I asked. Rachel folded her hands on the table and looked me straight in the eyes. Let's find out the truth. Together. We were silent for a few seconds, thinking about what had been said. Then I nodded. You're right. We need to know what's going on. And if our suspicions turn out to be correct, we will need to decide how to deal with it. Agree. Then let's start with what we have. I'll tell you everything I noticed in David's behavior, and you'll tell me what you noticed in Emily. Together, we will put together a picture. Thus began our unexpected union. A union of two people who wanted the truth, even if it turned out to be too painful. After meeting at the cafe, Rachel and I agreed to keep each other updated on anything we found out. Now our goal was clear, to understand what exactly was going on between Emily and David. We decided not to make hasty conclusions, but to first collect as much information as possible. And for this, we needed to observe. I started paying attention to Emily's schedule, noting when and how long she stayed at work. Rachel did the same with David. Within a week, patterns began to emerge. On Fridays, Emily came home later than usual, explaining this because of corporate meetings. David was also late. Moreover, they both often worked at the same time. Do you know what is most interesting? Rachel told me during our phone conversation. He began to carefully monitor his appearance before leaving the house. Previously, he was not so scrupulous, but now he always checks how his suit fits, what the smell of his cologne is. Emily has also changed in this regard, I admitted. When we first got married, she loved to take care of herself, but recently she began to do it with a new meaning, as if preparing for something special. We agreed that we would try to find out where exactly they go. A few days later, Rachel told me that she took a taxi and followed David when he said he had a work meeting downtown. The car brought him to a small, cozy restaurant called La Belle Vie. There he met Emily. They were sitting in the corner, Rachel said, her voice sounding tense. We talked and laughed. She leaned towards him. He whispered something to her. It didn't look like a business meeting. I listened in silence, feeling something unpleasant and heavy squeezing in my chest. I couldn't go inside without giving myself away, she continued. But it was clear from their body language that they felt comfortable. Too comfortable. My assumptions began to take shape. Rachel and I decided to continue observing and wait until we were confronted with the hard facts. That night I couldn't sleep. The feeling of anxiety did not let me go, and I decided to act. After waiting for Emily to fall asleep, I sat down at her laptop. The password remains the same our anniversary. This gave some kind of bitter irony. While checking her email, I came across correspondence with David. I read their messages, and with each new word, my breathing became heavier. I'll make my hotel reservation as usual. Everything will be ready at 7 p.m. Grand Haven Hotel. My heart beat so loudly that it seemed to be heard in the silence of the night. The night after I found the correspondence, I was sleepless. I scrolled through the messages again and again, hoping that at some point everything would turn out to be a misunderstanding, a mistake. But no, everything was very clear. The Grand Haven Hotel, as usual, meant that this was not their first meeting, perhaps not even the second. They had long ago crossed the line, and there was no longer any doubt. I picked up my phone and quickly texted Rachel. Gotcha. Meet tomorrow at 1 p.m. at the Riverside Cafe. The next morning, I sat at the table watching my children, and every minute became more and more aware that the consequences of what their mother had done would affect us all, especially them. They chatted carefree at breakfast, discussing school, friends, making plans for the weekend. Their voices sounded loud and joyful, and this caused me even more pain. I felt sorry for them. It's a pity for that invisible wall that may soon stand between us, a pity for the inevitable changes that they haven't even imagined yet. I knew that when the truth came out, their world would change, and my main task is to protect them, to make sure that this dirt does not touch their pure hearts, so that they continue to laugh as sincerely as they do now. Dad, will you pick us up after school today? Lily asked as she finished her peanut butter toast. Her blonde hair fell over her face, and she concentratedly brushed a strand behind her ear. I forced myself to smile. Of course, honey. But if I'm suddenly late, Grandma can pick you up. Ben, sitting opposite, nodded happily, almost knocking over his cup of milk. Can I show Grandma my new toy? She said she would teach me to play chess. Great idea, son, I replied, trying not to show the pain that was squeezing my chest. I took a sip of the cold coffee, feeling the bitterness settling on my tongue. Everything seemed so ordinary morning chores, the clink of spoons on plates, crumbs scattered on the table. But inside me, nothing was normal anymore. When we left the house, the children walked ahead, happily talking and discussing something. Lily gestured animatedly as she told Ben about a new project at school, and he looked at her with admiration, absorbing every word. They looked so happy, so carefree. I looked at them and thought, they don't deserve this. They should not suffer because of her choice. After taking them to school, I went to work. The whole way I had a depressing feeling. Time flew by quickly. Flow of tasks, calls, meetings. But every few minutes a phrase from the correspondence popped up in my head, as usual. They've done this more than once. They knew what they were doing. At 12:40, I put down the documents, which I couldn't read anyway, and got up from the table. I was seething with anxiety inside, but outwardly I maintained a calm expression. With a quick movement, he straightened the cuffs of his shirt, took a deep breath, and headed towards the exit. The secretary, a young girl with a short bob and a penetrating gaze, looked up from the monitor when I approached. She raised an eyebrow and smirked slightly, as if reading my thoughts. I need to go away, I said, buttoning my jacket. She tilted her head, a sly smile touching her lips. Oh, Mr. Harris, I hope this is something pleasant. I met her gaze and forced a forced smile. In a sense, yes, I answered, but there was no lightness in my voice. I arrived at Riverside at exactly 12:55. Rachel was already waiting. She looked calm, but her eyes showed fatigue. Today, she was wearing a formal gray suit that fit her figure perfectly. Despite her restraint, there was a hidden anger in her movements. What do you have? She asked immediately. I took out my phone and gave her the screenshots of the correspondence. She read silently. When she finished, she took a deep breath. There is no doubt now, she whispered. I nodded. We can stop digging. We know everything we need. Rachel leaned back in her chair, exhaling tiredly and carefully tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Something similar to bitterness flashed in her eyes, but not the kind that accompanies anger or resentment. It was the bitterness of disappointment, the realization that everything she believed in had collapsed. David and I don't have children, she finally said, slowly, as if weighing every word. We have a marriage contract. Divorce will take nothing away from me except a broken heart. She smiled bitterly, but there was not a drop of amusement in this grin. And for you, it's more difficult. I looked away, feeling something clench inside me. Rachel was right. She could break this farce, get out of it, losing only the illusion of happiness. What about me? My decision was not just about me. It concerned Lily and Ben, their lives, their children's hearts, their faith and family. I clenched my hands into fists, my fingers turning white from tension. Outside the cafe window, the familiar world was moving. People were rushing about business, cars were slowing down in front of traffic lights, children were laughing somewhere in the distance. Everything continued as if nothing had happened. I'm not one of those who forgives betrayal, I finally said, dully, almost in a whisper, but quite confidently. Emily lost me. These words sounded final, but did not bring relief. I took a deep breath, trying to get rid of the lump in my throat, and continued. But I don't want the children to suffer. It's not their fault. I need to think things through carefully. Rachel nodded slowly, crossing her arms over her chest. Understanding flashed in her eyes, not sympathy, not pity, but the realization that we were both on the same side of the barricades. We were silent for several seconds, each immersed in our own thoughts. Then she suddenly grinned briefly, but with some special shade in which bitterness and determination were mixed. "I'll arrange with my lawyer to take your case too," she said, carefully watching my reaction. "He is the best specialist in divorce proceedings, and you will need competent defense." I nodded, admitting that her proposal was more than reasonable. You cannot make mistakes in such matters. But then a light, almost playful smile touched her lips, and the very spark that showed her as a woman who was accustomed to keeping the situation under control lit up in her eyes. She tilted her head slightly to the side, studying me carefully. "What if we tickle their nerves a little before we show the cards?" I looked at her, feeling something new awakening inside, not just pain, not just anger, but a desire to take the situation into my own hands. "Do you have any ideas?" I asked, leaning forward. Rachel took a sip of coffee, enjoying its taste, then put the cup on the saucer, leaned slightly towards me, and, without hiding her satisfied expression, chuckled quietly. Rachel grinned again, but this time there was something predatory in her smile, a subtle hint of pleasure from the upcoming game. She leaned back in her chair, ran her finger along the edge of her cup, and looked at me with a conspiratorial expression. "Let's pretend for now that we don't know anything," she said slowly, enjoying every word, as if savoring them. "Let them continue to play their secret game. Only now we will ask them unexpected questions, make small hints." She paused, watching me listen intently, then leaned forward slightly, her voice becoming quieter, but this only gained more power. "Behave in such a way that they feel like they are about to get caught. Let them feel what it is like to live in constant tension." I thought, tapping my fingers on the edge of the table. It was an interesting idea. No, not just interesting, fair. Instead of immediately confronting them with the truth, we could give them the opportunity to experience the fear of discovery themselves. Let their hearts skip a beat at every casual glance. Let every careless word turn into a potential trap for them. Let them understand what it is like to live in anticipation of the moment when the lie will be revealed. I exhaled slowly and looked at Rachel. "This could work," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "But I need time to prepare the divorce papers and decide how best to deal with the children." The words were hard for me. I knew it was inevitable, but it's one thing to realize your marriage is over, and quite another to take the first steps towards its official end. Rachel nodded, her gaze colder, more focused. "Then let's act," she said confidently. "Let them enjoy their little secret for now. They don't have long left." Over the next few days, Rachel and I began putting our plans into action. We did not intend to create scandals or directly blame our spouses. No, for now we only wanted to make them nervous, to feel that something was going wrong. Let them worry and make mistakes themselves. The first step was mine. If we decided to play this game, then we had to start carefully, with subtle hints, with light pressure, which over time would develop into suffocating uncertainty. That evening, acting as if nothing had happened, as if I was just trying to make amends for recent tensions, I suggested that Emily go out to dinner. I waited for the right moment, and when the children had already gone to their rooms and a calm silence reigned in the house, I approached her, leaning against the door frame. "How about a romantic evening?" I asked casually, as if the proposal had arisen spontaneously. "We haven't been just the two of us for a long time, without children, without work." I carefully watched her reaction. Emily raised her head from the phone screen, raising her eyebrows. Slightly sincere surprise mixed with a hint of caution flashed in her gaze. "Is it true? Do you want to get out somewhere?" Her voice was even, but I detected a slight hesitation. "Of course," I answered with a slight smile. "I have already reserved a table at the Beautiful Life. You love this restaurant, right?" I noticed her face tense slightly, just for a split second, but then she immediately pulled herself together. "Oh yes, great place," she replied with a tight smile. "Do you really want to go there?" I shrugged, deliberately pretending not to notice her internal tension. "Why not?" I said easily, as if all this was just an ordinary gesture of a caring husband. She agreed, but I already saw that her thoughts were occupied with something else. Throughout the evening, she nervously looked around several times, as if checking to see if she saw someone familiar. I deliberately started talking about work, about her colleagues, hoping to catch her in some lie, but Emily was careful. However, her concern spoke for itself. Meanwhile, Rachel did her little test. She left a receipt for her room at the Grand Haven on the nightstand. Not in plain sight, but so that David would definitely notice her. And he noticed. In the evening, he brought a piece of paper and asked with a nervous laugh, "What is this?" Rachel pretended to be confused. I don't know where you found it." "She was in our bedroom. Have you been to this hotel? Maybe she mixed it up with some other documents. Or do you want to tell me something?" Her tone was soft, but there was a hidden challenge in her eyes. David hesitated and hurried to throw the receipt in the trash, clearly relieved that the conversation had not gone any further. But the surprises didn't end there. That same night, Emily and David began to actively correspond. I knew that she was often on the phone, but now I carefully monitored her behavior. When she went to the bathroom, I took her laptop and went back to my email. "You won't believe where Michael decided to invite me. La belle vie." Crap. What kind of coincidence? Rachel left a receipt from Grand Haven in her bedroom today. I thought my heart had sunk to my feet. They couldn't suspect anything. These are just ridiculous coincidences. Certainly, our naive spouses don't even know. Michael is generally too simple-minded to think of it. Yeah, he acts like a good husband, but to be honest, it annoys me. I'm tired of his boring predictability. Rachel, too. She thinks her grip on David is still strong, but I've gotten tired of it a long time ago. The more I read, the more anger grew within me. They didn't just cheat. They despised us, made fun of. They discussed us like two conspirators, complaining about our shortcomings while they continued to meet behind our backs. I copied the correspondence and forwarded it to Rachel. A minute later, my phone vibrated. This idiot allowed himself to insult me. I was going to just get a divorce, but now perhaps I should turn to my father. David will be sorry. I imagined her face contorted with rage. Her father was an influential man, and if she really involves him, David will have a hard time. At the same moment, another message arrived. It was Rachel's lawyer. "The documents are almost ready. Give me a couple of days, and the process can begin." I looked at the phone screen and took a deep breath. After the latest events, Rachel and I realized that our traders are still confident in their impunity. They consider us naive, blind. We decided to continue the game, but now to make it even more interesting, to bring them to a state where they begin to give themselves away. I sent Emily a message. "I'm late at work. I have a lot to do. Don't expect me for dinner." She answered with a short, "Okay," without further questions. She didn't even try to clarify what I'd be doing or when I'd be back. This only strengthened my decision to move on. I arrived at Rachel's house exactly at 7 in the evening, as agreed. Her house looked impeccable, a neatly trimmed lawn, a strict facade, massive doors with wrought iron handles. Everything here spoke of wealth and good taste, but not of ostentatious luxury, but of a clear understanding of what the ideal home of a successful person should look like. I was about to get out of the car when the door opened and Rachel appeared in the doorway. She moved with easy grace. Her posture conveyed the confidence inherent in those who are used to being in control of the situation. She chose an elegant but unobtrusive burgundy dress that emphasized the graceful lines of her figure. Her hair was styled in a casual but clearly deliberate wave, and light makeup only enhanced her natural attractiveness. In her hands, she held a small bottle of perfume. As she got closer, she stopped for a moment, smiled slyly, and sprayed some on my shirt. "Let your wife have food for thought," she said with a wink. I chuckled. Her audacity amused me. After adjusting my collar, I took a step to the side and opened the car door for her. "Please, madam," I said with slight irony. "What a gentleman," she noted with approval, sitting down in the salon. We went to the cinema, choosing a light comedy. I wasn't sure I could relax, but as it turned out, Rachel was surprisingly pleasant company. She didn't just laugh at the jokes in the film, her comments were so witty that I had to hold back my laughter so as not to disturb the rest of the audience. Despite her status as the daughter of an influential businessman, she did not seem arrogant or pompous at all. During the movie, I caught myself thinking that for the first time in a long time I felt good, without heaviness on the soul. No constant tension. It's just easy. After the movie, we decided not to rush home and went to a cozy cafe on the corner of the street. Rachel ordered a caramel cappuccino and I ordered a strong espresso. We sat at a small table by the window and watched passers-by rushing about their business. "I thought this plan would be a way for me to get back at David," Rachel admitted, twirling the cup in her hands. "But you know, it seems to me that for the first time in a long time, I'm just living." I looked at her. There was no anger or pain in her eyes, only slight thoughtfulness. "I understand," I nodded. "When you live in a lie, even an unconscious one, you lose yourself. And then suddenly you realize that life could be completely different." She grinned. "Tell me, Michael, would you ever forgive Emily?" I thought about it. The question was unexpected, but the answer came immediately. "No," I said firmly. "For me, betrayal is the point of no return. This means that the person has already chosen who he wants to be with. I don't have to fight for a woman who put me in second place." Rachel nodded, as if in agreement. We sat for a while longer, and then I took her home. I returned home late, when everyone was already asleep. Looking into the children's rooms, I kissed the children on the foreheads and quietly walked into the bedroom. Emily was sleeping on her side, her breathing even. I deliberately placed the jacket so that when she put it away in the morning, she would definitely smell the perfume. I changed my clothes in the dark, lay down in bed, and closed my eyes. For the first time in a long time, I felt neither anger nor pain, just a strange, almost pleasant anticipation. Everything is going according to plan. The morning started as usual. Emily got up before me, went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast, and I lay there for a while, listening to the sounds of her steps. The children chatted happily at the table, discussing their plans for the day. It would seem that everything was going as usual, but I knew that today something would change. I heard the washing machine start in the bathroom. A few minutes later, Emily came out of the bathroom. She stopped in the doorway, holding my shirt in her hands. Doubt flashed in her eyes, but she didn't say anything. She knew that the smell of someone else's perfume could not just appear. But what was she going to do now? I watched her from behind my cup of coffee, pretending not to notice her worried look. She silently returned to the bathroom and continued loading things into the machine. When she reappeared in the kitchen, her movements became a little sharper than usual. She still smiled at the children, but I saw the tension in her jaw and heard it in the tone of her voice. There seemed to be anxiety brewing inside her, but she tried to hide it, as if she was afraid that I would notice. After breakfast, we decided to spend the day as a family. The children wanted to go to the park, feed the ducks, and ride the carousel. I knew Emily would have wanted to decline, citing fatigue or business, but after the morning's opening, she preferred to stay close to her family. Perhaps she needed to make sure everything was under control. When we arrived at the park, The children happily ran towards the lake, while Emily and I walked slowly along the path. She didn't let go of Ben's hand, but her attention was focused on me. I felt her gaze even in those moments when I pretended to enjoy the weather. "You've become different lately," she suddenly said, breaking the silence. I turned my gaze to her and raised my eyebrows. "In what sense?" Emily shrugged, trying to look indifferent. "Don't know. The mood, probably." She looked at me carefully. "You are very cheerful today." I chuckled. "Maybe I just decided to worry less about what is not in my control." She nodded thoughtfully, but I saw that the answer did not satisfy her. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and her fingers nervously tapped the strap of her bag. We bought the kids ice cream, choosing for Lily her favorite strawberry with white chocolate chips, and for Ben classic vanilla, which he always ate with care, not letting a single drop fall on his hands. They enjoyed their delicacy, chatting among themselves, laughing and occasionally staining their lips with sticky sweet stains. I looked at them and felt a warm mixture of love and bitterness spreading in my chest. They were innocent in this story, and I will do everything to ensure that their childhood remains bright. Emily sat opposite me, and even when she pretended to listen to Lily, I noticed how her gaze returned to me again and again. She secretly watched, studied my every movement, trying to catch even the slightest change in my behavior. I deliberately behaved at ease, easily and naturally. He joked with the children, put his arm around Ben's shoulders, and lightly ruffled Lily's hair, as if nothing had changed. I laughed, told stories, played with them the way I always did. But from time to time, I took out my phone, slid my finger across the screen, typed short messages, answered them with a barely noticeable smile. Not too often, but just enough to create the effect of slight detachment. Enough to give Emily pause. I noticed how she gripped the ice cream scoop a little tighter, how her fingers involuntarily trembled when she turned her gaze to my phone. She tried not to show it, but I saw anxiety growing inside her. As the kids went on the carousel, I noticed Emily sneak a glance in my direction, as if she was trying to decide whether to ask directly. I waited with bated breath, but she still didn't make up her mind. In the evening, we returned home. Emily looked tired but tense. After dinner, I helped Lily pack her backpack for school, put Ben to bed, and then headed to the shower. When I came out, Emily was already sitting in bed with her phone in her hands, but when she noticed me, she quickly blocked it. She watched me, waiting for me to say something, but I just wished her good night. Lying in the dark, I felt her tossing and turning next to me, unable to sleep. She didn't know what was going on, but for the first time she began to think that she might not be the only one with a secret. Now it was her time to worry. The next day I decided that since Rachel and I had such a good time last time, it was worth repeating. The divorce papers were due tomorrow, and I understood that a difficult stage lay ahead of me. Therefore, I wanted to spend the last days in a neutral environment without unnecessary worries. The children's summer holidays began. They had been waiting for this moment for a long time and knew that they would go to my parents. I was glad that they would be able to spend time in a cozy, warm atmosphere, away from the storms that would soon break out in our home. Emily and I helped collect their things together. They hardly spoke to each other, but answered the children's questions. She looked like her mind was on something else, and I didn't try to hide it. Lily happily packed her favorite books into her backpack, and Ben couldn't decide for a long time which toys to take with him. Emily tried to appear calm, but her gaze often lingered on me longer than usual. When everything was ready, we took Lily and Ben to my parents. The children happily said goodbye to us and ran into the house. Emily and I stood by the car for a couple of seconds, each lost in our own thoughts. "They will miss you," she said quietly. I nodded. "We too," I answered, without adding that I definitely wouldn't miss her. When I returned home, I didn't stay too long. I decided that I wanted to go to the bar, relax, and get distracted. I got ready, but I didn't intend to discuss it with Emily. However, as soon as she saw me putting on my jacket and taking the keys, she couldn't stand it. "Are you going somewhere?" I looked at her calmly. "I have a meeting with colleagues." She frowned. "You haven't had such meetings before." I smiled and shrugged. You too. Her face tensed. She clearly did not expect such an answer. I saw how she wanted to ask another question, but she restrained herself. I walked away, leaving her alone with her thoughts. In fact, I did go to the bar, not with my colleagues, but with Rachel. We met at the entrance, and she immediately grinned. You look like you urgently need alcohol. I think so, I grinned in response. We ordered cocktails and sat at a table by the window. The atmosphere of the bar was noisy but cozy. People laughed, talked, waiters scurried between tables. Here I felt freer than at home. Imagine, Rachel said, taking a sip. David didn't even notice that I wasn't home until late when we went to the movies. Apparently, he really has no feelings for me. Or maybe it never happened. It was just convenient for him to be with me, status, money, help from my father. I nodded, realizing that her words were very similar to my situation. Emily didn't say anything either, but I can see that she's starting to get nervous. She noticed the smell of perfume and felt changes in my behavior. But for now, he is silent. Fear is a powerful thing, Rachel grinned. They are afraid to even think that we know something. I nodded, and we decided to drop all talk about our marriages. Just have fun. We laughed, ordered more cocktails, and then even hit the dance floor. Rachel turned out to be an excellent dancer, and to my surprise, I felt truly free for the first time in a long time. We obviously had too much alcohol, but at that moment it didn't matter. When we finally left the bar, the night air cleared my head a little. Rachel also looked relaxed, but her eyes showed the same weariness as mine. We stood by the car, slowly leaving. Well, Mr. Meeting with colleagues, she grinned. Did you have a fun evening? I nodded. Yes, even too much. I haven't had it this easy for a long time. She nodded and looked into the distance. Do you think they are spending time together now too? She suddenly asked. I shrugged. Maybe, but you know what? Let them do what they want. Soon it won't matter anymore. She smiled. Yes, you are right. I got into the car, but before starting the engine, I glanced at my phone. I remembered that tomorrow morning a letter with prepared divorce documents was waiting for me to be delivered. But now I don't care. For the first time in a long time, I just wanted to live this moment without unnecessary thoughts about the future. In the morning, the doorbell rang. A dull sound sounded in the silence of the house, breaking through the viscous slumber. I heard him, but didn't want to get up. My head was still buzzing from last night, thoughts lazily flowed into one another, and my body filled with a pleasant heaviness, as if the bed was holding me in its soft embrace. However, Emily was no longer around. The sheets on her side were cold, which meant she had been up for a long time. A few seconds later, I heard her light steps in the corridor, then the click of the lock and the muffled creak of the door. Package. I was in no hurry to get up, but inside I already knew what it was. Documents. Everything is prepared, everything is decorated. A small, inconspicuous envelope that carries a point in one life and the beginning of another. I closed my eyes, breathing in the morning silence, which now felt strangely inevitable. A few minutes later, the warm, rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee floated through the house. He made his way into the bedroom, mixed with the soft light breaking through the curtains, and finally pulled me out of the embrace of sleep. I slowly sat up on the bed, rubbed my face with my hands, and took a deep breath. There was a day ahead that might change everything. When I finally walked out into the kitchen, there was already a cup of hot coffee on the table. Emily sat opposite me, looking at me from under her brows. Her arms were crossed and her fingers tapped nervously on the table. Something like irritation mixed with anxiety flashed in her eyes. Where were you last night? Her voice sounded cold, but barely restrained emotions were heard in it. I took the cup, took a sip, and calmly answered. I told you I had a meeting with colleagues. Her eyes flashed. With colleagues? She chuckled, shaking her head. I wonder, since when did you start having night meetings with your colleagues? I shrugged, pretending that her tone didn't bother me at all. Since when did you have them? Her face flushed, her cheeks flushed, but almost immediately she pulled herself together. a barely noticeable trembling of the lips, a slight tightening of the jaw. All this lasted a split second, but I caught the moment. Her eyes narrowed, as if she were trying to calculate my intentions, like a chess player who suddenly finds himself in a disadvantageous position. I saw how thoughts were feverishly spinning in her head, how she was frantically searching for the right reaction. Her shoulders tensed slightly, her fingers involuntarily clenched, and her gaze darted to the side, as if she was hoping to find a way out of the situation there. She clearly expected something different. I thought that I would start making excuses, that I would stammer, come up with explanations, look for mitigating circumstances. Perhaps she was hoping for a flash of anger, for emotions that could give her the opportunity to seize control of the situation. But I remained calm. My expression was serene, my tone was even, my gaze was confident. And this only unsettled her more. I saw uncertainty flicker in the depths of her eyes, a subtle worry. "Michael, I'm serious." She stood up abruptly and leaned her hands on the table. "Why do your clothes smell like someone else's perfume again?" I looked at her, trying to look as calm as possible. "Why does this bother you?" I asked, taking another sip of coffee. Emily opened her mouth, but hesitated for a second. She began to blink rapidly, as if trying to find the right words. Her breathing became a little deeper, and her fingers clenched into a fist. "Because it's strange," she almost shouted. "You're behaving differently. You've never done this before. You leave in the evenings, come back late, and now there's this smell. Who is she?" I chuckled. "Emily, you say that as if you yourself have always been a model of honesty." She turned pale. For a second, panic flashed in her eyes, but was immediately replaced by irritation. What do you mean by this?" Her voice became trembling. I put the cup on the table and looked straight at her. "You know what I mean by this." She took a step back, as if someone had punched her in the stomach. Lips trembled, fingers clenched into fists. This is ridiculous." She spoke too quickly. Were you following me? Michael, can you hear yourself?" I silently looked at her, without uttering a word, without making unnecessary movements. He just stood there, giving her space, but not leaving her a way out. Emily tried to remain calm, but I saw the thin film of fragile composure begin to crack. She was already starting to make excuses without even realizing it. Every word she said was hasty, defensive. Her voice rose and then became even again, but there were subtle notes of panic in it. Her chest was heaving, she was breathing deeply, trying to control herself. But the longer the silence between us lasted, the more she lost control. Confusion shone in her eyes. Her thin fingers nervously squeezed the edge of her sleeve, as if the fabric could give her at least some kind of support. But instead of confessing, she continued to attack. You're just trying to make me look guilty, right? Do you think I don't see this? You cheat on me, and now you want to make me feel guilty." Her voice broke into a hoarse cry. I shook my head, remaining icy calm. "You've painted yourself into a corner, Emily. I didn't even try to do this." She pursed her lips, her face distorted in a grimace of fear and anger. "It's not like that, Michael." Her voice weakened, but now there were other notes in it. She suddenly changed, stopped attacking, and she realized that I knew. I really do. You understand that everything is not so simple." She continued, but now her voice was hoarse, almost pleading. I slowly stood up, picked up my cup, and headed to the sink. "Everything is very clear, Emily, and you know this very well." My voice sounded calm, almost casual, but it didn't have the softness that it had before. I didn't expect an answer, and he didn't need it. I turned to the sink and washed the cup, slowly, as if it was an ordinary day, and not the moment when our entire family life was completely collapsing. Drops of water flowed down the ceramics, loudly hitting the metal surface, and I concentratedly wiped it with a towel, as if I was trying to erase not only the moisture, but also the traces of the past, which until recently seemed unshakable. When the cup took its place on the shelf, I straightened up, wiped my hands, and slowly walked out of the kitchen, taking with me the envelope with the documents. The papers rustled under my fingers as a reminder that there was no turning back. I walked into the living room, sat down in a chair, and placed the envelope on the coffee table in front of me. A slight movement, but it seemed final, like a line that cannot be crossed without consequences. I looked at the papers but did not open them. I knew that everything was already a foregone conclusion, but I wanted to hear her reaction, see the realization in her eyes. There was tense silence in the room. Only somewhere outside the window could be heard the muffled noise of the street, the barking of a neighbor's dog, the distant sound of passing cars. 5 minutes passed, maybe more. Finally, Emily entered. I heard her steps before I saw her. Light, but uncertain, hasty, as if she had not yet decided whether to come in. When she appeared in the doorway, I immediately noticed that she was nervous. Her breathing was uneven, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Her hands were shaking, but she carefully tried to hide it by clasping her fingers together. Her gaze darted around the room, as if she was looking for support, looking for a way out, but couldn't find it. She stopped at the door, not daring to come closer. I was silent. The silence in the room became almost tangible, oppressive, stretching between us like an invisible abyss. "What is this?" Her voice sounded quieter than before, but there was still anger in it. I nodded towards the envelope. "Documents." She swallowed, took a step forward, and sat down on the couch opposite me. She was silent for a few seconds, then, gathering her courage, she exhaled. "Michael, we can't just end this. You can't just push me away like that." I looked at her. For the first time in a long time, Emily's eyes showed neither arrogance nor irritation, only fear. "Emily," I said calmly, "it's already over. You know that." She shook her head, her eyes shining with tears. "No, I made a mistake, yes, but Lord Michael, that doesn't mean it has to end. Didn't you love me? Can't we fix this?" I pursed my lips. This conversation had to happen. I knew that she would try to justify herself, beg, and look for a way out. But the only thing she couldn't do was change the past. "I loved you," I admitted, "but now I can't trust you." Emily sobbed. She raised her hands to her face, hid it in her palms, and then spoke in a broken voice. "It was a mistake. I was confused. All this moving, new place, new job, new acquaintances. David, he was so persistent in showing attention to me. I didn't think it would go this far." I smiled bitterly. "You're making excuses. Do you want me to feel sorry for you? So that I close my eyes to everything? Sorry, but this doesn't work." She shuddered and raised her eyes to me, full of prayer. I'll do anything. We can try again. Go to a family therapist. I'll turn down the job. I just don't want to lose you." I shook my head. "You've already lost me, Emily, the moment I made my choice." She began to sob and grabbed the edge of the table as if she needed to hold on to something. I looked at her without pity. All I felt was tiredness. "You loved me." Her voice trembled. I thought you could forgive me." "What if I fix everything? Will you give me a chance?" I took a deep breath, feeling a heaviness building in my chest, and ran my hand over my face, as if trying to erase the fatigue that had accumulated over the past weeks. Everything was boiling inside, but outside I remained calm. "Emily, I can't live with someone who betrayed me so easily," I said quietly but firmly, looking her straight in the eyes. "Who dated another man and then came home as if nothing had happened." I took a step to the side, then slowly walked around the table, but not in order to leave. I needed space. I needed to catch my breath before I said the main thing. "I can't forget it, and I don't want to." These words hung in the air, saturating it with tension. Emily jumped up as if she had been struck by an electric shock. She began to rush around the room. Her steps were fast and impetuous. She clasped her hands on her chest, then unclenched her fingers again, as if she didn't know what to do with herself. His chest heaved sharply, his breathing became labored. "But you are not a saint," she blurted out. Her voice trembled, but there was a desperate attempt to defend herself. "Maybe you have someone too. Maybe these perfumes are not an accident. Maybe you too." She fell silent so abruptly, as if she had stepped on her own tongue. The realization that she was talking too much flashed across her face and reflected in her widened eyes. I slowly rose from the chair and stood opposite her. "You know that's not true," I said calmly, but there was steel in my voice. She looked away, her lips trembled, but I didn't give her time to collect herself. "But even if it were," I paused, watching as her fingers clenched convulsively. "Do you have the right to tell me anything after everything you've done?" Her lips trembled and tears rolled down her cheeks. She was driven into a corner, and for the first time in all this time, she realized that she had no way out. I took the envelope, stood up, and placed it in front of her. "Sign," I said firmly. "This is the only thing left to do." Emily didn't move. She stood rooted to the spot, her hands clenched into fists, and her gaze was riveted on the envelope lying on the table, as if it were something poisonous, dangerous, carrying an inevitable sentence. I saw how her throat twitched, how she swallowed, unable to immediately find words. Then her eyes slowly looked up at me. A storm of emotions splashed through them: shock, pain, anger. Tears welled up in her eyelashes, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, anger flashed in her gaze, overshadowing everything else. "We have children, Michael." Her voice broke on the last word, turning almost into a scream. "Do you want to just leave them? You always said that family is the most important thing." Her chest heaved sharply, her breathing became labored, her hands trembled from tension. She looked at me as if she was trying to break through my cold facade, cling to it, break it, make me doubt, change my mind. But I already decided everything a long time ago. I looked into her eyes coldly, without blinking, without looking away. "When you were in the room Grand Haven with David, did you think about family?" Her body twitched as if from a slap. The lips trembled, the gaze darted to the side, but immediately returned to me, filled with something new: fear, confusion, and even more anger. I saw how her chest heaved sharply, how her fingers dug into the fabric of her clothes, crushing them in her fist. For a few seconds, it seemed as if she couldn't breathe, that the words were stuck in her throat. But then everything changed. Her face was distorted with rage. "You will never see children again," she blurted out. "I will make sure that the court takes my side. You will be left with nothing." I chuckled. Her threats didn't work. "At best, we'll have joint custody, Emily," I said in a flat, cold voice, crossing my arms over my chest. "This is standard practice in the United States unless one of the parents poses a threat to the children." I paused, giving her time to process what I had just said. "I can't imagine. I am a good father, I have a stable job and income. The court will never take away my custody." Emily froze, her fingers trembling, then clenching into fists. The face tensed, the jaw clenched so that tense shadows appeared on the cheekbones. I continued without looking away. "I have already discussed all the points of divorce with the lawyer. Listen carefully." I took the documents from the table, their smooth surface pleasantly cooled my fingers. I sat back in my chair, unfolded the first page, and began to read, explaining each point clearly, without unnecessary emotions, like at a business meeting where I dictate the terms. First, joint custody. "The children will stay with you in this house because I want to reduce stress for them. They don't need moving and a new school, but I have the right to visit them at any time and participate in their lives." Emily pressed her lips tightly together. Her breathing became heavy, but she remained silent. I saw anger sparkle in the depths of her eyes, but she did not interrupt. "Second, I only pay child support. Everything else is your responsibility. You are an adult woman. No one is stopping you from earning for your needs." Emily raised her head sharply, her eyes darting, as if she was looking for a weak point in my words, something to latch on to. She opened her mouth, but not finding a suitable argument, closed it again. I didn't stop. "Third, we don't make scenes in front of children. They shouldn't have to suffer the consequences of your decisions. For them, we simply part peacefully. No scandals, no dirt. I won't let you hurt them." Her lips trembled, her fingers nervously fiddled with the hem of her sleeve. She looked like she wanted to say something, but I didn't give her time. "Fourth, when the children grow up, this house will be sold and the amount will be divided in half. I rent a place nearby to be close to them. Emily took a deep breath, her chest heaving with the emotions she was trying to contain. Anger, irritation, powerlessness, all this was seething in her, reflected in the tense features of her face. She understood that it was useless to argue, but her pride did not allow her to simply accept everything without a fight. I put the documents aside and leaned forward, lowering my voice to a predatory, icy whisper. And the last thing, if you refuse to sign, I will give you such a reputation that you will never find a job in our city again. I saw how she tensed, her fingers convulsively clenched into fists. Do you think your company won't be interested in what office passions are going on there? I chuckled, not taking my eyes off her. I know how to present it in such a way that you will be kicked out in disgrace. She trembled. I saw a wave of panic wash over her. She understood perfectly well that I was not bluffing. There was no more rage or tears in Emily's eyes, only awareness of the inevitable. You're blackmailing me. She breathed out, her voice barely audible. I'm giving you a chance to come out of this with dignity, I replied in an even voice. But if you choose to resist, I won't stop. You ruined this marriage, but I won't let you ruin my life and the lives of our children. She turned away, her shoulders shaking. A few minutes of silence. She then slowly took the pen, took a deep breath, and signed the papers. It seemed that at that moment she completely broke down. She placed the documents in front of me and looked up. There was no longer any anger or despair in her eyes, only emptiness. I hope you'll be happy, Michael, she whispered. I silently took the papers, put them in an envelope, and stood up. I felt neither joy nor anger, only relief. I'm already happy, because now I'm free from a liar like you. After the summer holidays, the moment came for which I was waiting with relief, and at the same time with anxiety. Emily and I had to explain to the children that we would now live separately. Despite all our differences, I firmly adhered to one principle: children should not suffer because of our decisions. Emily and I collected them in the living room. Lily and Ben sat on the sofa, looking at each other. I noticed that they didn't look scared, rather wary. Dear ones, I began, trying to speak calmly. Mom and I made an important decision. We will no longer live together, but this does not mean that we will stop being a family. Emily exhaled nervously and nodded. You know that sometimes parents get divorced, she added. And this does not mean that any of us loves you less. It just happened that way. Lily nodded, and Ben seemed to think about it, then asked, So now we will have two houses? I smiled. In a sense, yes. You will live with your mother, but I will be nearby. I rented an apartment not far from here, so I can always be there when you need me. Lily shrugged. It was the same with my friend's parents. The main thing is that you don't quarrel like that, her parents, she said, and began to cry. I walked up to her and hugged her and my son. I looked at Emily. We both understood that our situation was far from ideal, but the children saw only the external picture: an amicable divorce. That's exactly how it should be. I used the time while the children were with their grandparents to good effect. I bought a small but cozy apartment nearby to be closer to the children. It wasn't as spacious as our house, but it was enough for me. This place symbolized a new stage in my life. During this time, I continued to communicate with Rachel. Our conversations became longer, and our meetings became more familiar. We drank coffee in small, cozy cafes, sitting by the windows and watching passers-by. Sometimes we walked through the park, leisurely walking along alleys strewn with golden leaves. I felt at ease in her company. No tension, no pretense. She understood because she had gone through the same thing. One day, sitting at a table in her favorite coffee shop, Rachel, cupping her latte cup in her hands, grinned and shook her head, remembering her divorce. When my father found out what David did, she paused, her fingers gripping the porcelain a little tighter. He gave him such a beating that he signed the papers without reading them and stormed out of our house. I laughed, imagining this scene. David, always so confident, self-satisfied, accustomed to feeling like the master of the situation, and suddenly driven into a corner by a man whom he clearly underestimated. Rachel shrugged, a small smile tugging at her lips. He was too self-confident, she continued, slightly twisting the cup in her hands. I thought that I would just kick him out, that he would still be able to dictate terms to me. But father, she looked up at me, and a twinkle flashed in her eyes. Father does not forgive those who disgrace our family. I nodded, tapping the rim of my cup thoughtfully. There was no malice in her words, only a firm awareness of how this world works. I saw that she had finally let go of the past. So do I. When the court officially confirmed our divorce, I felt neither pain nor relief, but some strange, empty silence inside. The chapter is closed. The story is over. All that remained was to live on, but how exactly this question was still hanging in the air. Rachel and I decided to celebrate. Without big words, without pathos, just the way we wanted. That evening we went to the bar again, which had already become a symbol of change for us. There, amid the dim light and a slight hum of voices, we found our corner, ordered drinks, and at first just sat in silence, each alone with our thoughts. Then, almost simultaneously, we started talking. We remembered this whole path from the first suspicions, from the pain, which then seemed unbearable, to this moment when everything was left behind. At first we laughed, and there was something liberating in that laughter. Then they both cried. Not loudly, not desperately, but simply allowing yourself to release the remnants of pain without being ashamed of emotions. And then they laughed again, realizing the absurdity and cruel irony of fate. When energetic music started playing on the dance floor, we, without saying a word, got up and walked out into the crowd, losing ourselves in the rhythm. We danced as if we wanted to shake out all the burden of the past, all the unspoken questions, all the resentment and disappointment. I watched Rachel, how her hair fell over her shoulders, how the lights of freedom sparkled in her eyes. She laughed, spun, closed her eyes, surrendering to the moment, and I understood her. As the night approached, the cocktails took their toll, and reality became softer, blurrier, as if its boundaries were slightly blurred. We sat closer to each other, continuing to talk, no longer choosing words. Somewhere in between, how did we even survive this? And what now? I suddenly caught myself looking at her differently. She was more than just an ally in this fight. When I opened my eyes in the morning, the first thing I realized was that I was not alone. The air in the room was warm, filled with muted light breaking through the half-closed curtains. The light aroma of her perfume hovered nearby, mixing with something subtle, barely perceptible, but unmistakably familiar, the smell of someone else's warmth, someone else's breath. I froze, not moving. A second later, I realized that Rachel was also lying motionless. Her breathing was even, but I felt that she was not sleeping. We were both afraid to move, as if any movement could destroy this fragile, unsteady moment, turn it into something real, irreversible. "Are you awake?" Her voice sounded hoarse, mourning, with a tinge of sleepy carelessness. "Not anymore," I muttered, feeling a slight smile touch the corners of my lips. She carefully rolled over onto her back, her hair scattered across the pillow. She just lay there for a few seconds, looking at the ceiling, and then sighed and covered her face with her hands. "Oh, damn," she moaned, her voice sounding either confused or with a hidden chuckle. I chuckled as I watched her shoulders tremble subtly. Yeah, an unexpected turn. Rachel removed her hands from her face and looked at me. Her eyes were still a little clouded with sleep, but something meaningful and appreciative already flashed in them. If it weren't for the morning urge, she winced and slowly sat down, ruffling her hair. We probably would have stayed like that until lunch. We looked at each other. Silence hung in the air, not awkward, but filled with unspoken thoughts, questions that had no answers yet. Then, as if deciding there was no point in procrastinating, Rachel sighed, threw back the sheet, and headed into the bathroom. I lay there, looking at the ceiling, listening to the sound of water outside the door, and trying to comprehend what had just happened. Half an hour later, we were sitting in the kitchen, each with our own cup of coffee, lost in thought. The silence was not awkward, but rather thoughtful, filled with something new, barely formed, but already tangible. Rachel slowly ran her finger along the rim of the mug, as if trying to piece together her thoughts. Her gaze was directed downwards, but I knew that she was thinking about every word before saying them out loud. You know, she finally said, her voice quiet but confident, I would like to believe that this is not a mistake. Not just drunken passion, not a desire to fill the void. Her words hung in the air, clinging to the early morning sun breaking through the window, to the faint aroma of coffee, to the slight scent of her perfume that still hovered nearby. I put the mug on the table, the warmth of the ceramic disappeared from my palms, but a different warmth spread inside me, deeper, more conscious. Standing up, I slowly walked around the table, approached her, and leaned closer. Rachel looked up. There was no fear in them, only anticipation, mixed with something that she, perhaps, did not yet fully understand herself. And at that moment I realized I had felt this for a long time. I hope so too, I whispered, letting the words fade into the space between us. I leaned over and kissed her. It was not a spontaneous gesture, not a momentary clouding of reason, not a drunken impulse caused by cocktails and a confusion of feelings. This was a deliberate step, because during all this time, while we exposed our cheating spouses, while we experienced pain, anger, disappointment, despair, I realized one thing: Rachel is much more to me than just a friend. She went through the same thing as me. She knew what it was like to have someone you trusted betray you, destroy everything that seemed solid. She understood my pain like no one else. And that's exactly how, without loud confessions, without much thought, without artificial drama, but with complete clarity, our relationship began. It's been a few months since Rachel and I moved in together. Everything happened easily, naturally, as if it was supposed to be so. She didn't try to replace someone or take someone else's place. She was simply there, bringing light into my home that I so lacked. But I understood that sooner or later the moment would come when I would need to introduce the children to her. Lily and Ben knew that I was no longer alone, but who exactly took a place in my life remained a mystery to them. I didn't want to make it a formality. I didn't want dinner conversations or an official introduction. Everything had to happen naturally, without unnecessary stress. So I came up with the perfect plan. The kids had been dreaming of going to Disneyland for a long time, and now I had the perfect excuse. When I told Lily and Ben that we were planning a weekend at Disneyland, they nearly knocked me over with hugs. Seriously? Lily screamed, hanging on my neck. Are we really going? Ben was jumping on the spot, his eyes shining. Really, I laughed, scooping them both into a tight hug. But the most interesting was their next question. Will anyone else go? Lily clarified, narrowing her eyes slyly. Yes, my friend will go with us, I answered with a slight mystery. The children looked at each other. Is she cool? Ben asked, clearly trying to figure out if he should push himself. I smiled. I think you can decide for yourself. The road to Disneyland turned out to be not just comfortable, but unexpectedly fun. The children and Rachel found a common language literally from the first minutes. Lily, as always, took on the role of chief interviewer and immediately began asking Rachel about her favorite cartoons. Do you prefer The Little Mermaid or Beauty and the Beast? Oh, difficult choice, Rachel thought. Probably Beauty and the Beast. I've always wanted a library like Belle's. Lily nodded with satisfaction, recognizing her as worthy. And Ben decided to test her knowledge of Star Wars. Do you even know the names of all the Jedi? Rachel narrowed her eyes slyly and without hesitation listed the entire list, including even minor characters. Ben looked at her respectfully and then nodded affirmatively. Okay, you're awesome. Rachel winked at me, and I realized that the acquaintance was already going better than I could have imagined. When we got to Disneyland, the day turned into a whirlwind of laughter, rides, and funny situations. Everything was going perfectly. One of the funniest moments happened when Lily and Rachel decided to go for a ride on a roller coaster. Are you sure? I asked Rachel, seeing Lily pulling her hand towards the line. Certainly, she said cheerfully. I love the thrill, But when they walked off the ride a few minutes later, holding hands and laughing loudly, I realized that the situation had not turned out the way she had hoped. Lily was a little unsteady, but looked excited. "Lily, are you okay?" I asked, noticing her worried expression. "Yes," she laughed. But Rachel screamed louder than everyone else. Rachel just snorted, pouting her lips. It was just unexpected. Lily narrowed her eyes slyly. "It's okay, you'll soon get used to it." Ben, meanwhile, found special pleasure in water attractions. We were all soaking wet when he insisted on riding Splash Mountain for the second time in a row, but his satisfied smile was worth it. At some point, when the sun was already setting, he looked at me with the most serious look and said, "Can we always travel with her?" I smiled, glancing at Rachel, who at that moment was trying to shake water out of her sneaker, laughing at her own failures. "I think so," I replied. During lunch, when everyone was already a little tired from the crazy day, Lily, thoughtfully chewing French fries, suddenly said, "She is very cheerful, and he understands exactly what children need." Rachel sighed theatrically, made a serious face, and answered with an important look. "That's because I'm still a child at heart." "Then this is where you want to go," Lily exclaimed and suddenly grabbed her by the hand, dragging her towards the attraction with giant cups. I watched as they laughed and spun, clutching the edges of the spinning bowl, and realized that I could not have dreamed of a better acquaintance. When the weekend ended, I took the kids back to Emily's. The faint scent of cotton candy and ice cream still hung in the car, mingling with the smell of the evening air. Rachel stayed in the car while I brought Lily and Ben into the house. As soon as the door closed behind us, the children immediately began to chatter violently, as if they were overwhelmed with emotions that they could not contain. And then she screamed at bitter horrors. Ben blurted out, almost jumping with delight, "It was so funny." And also, Dad and his girlfriend tried to win me a huge teddy bear, but they didn't succeed. Lily laughed, looking back at me with a sly squint. "Hey," I was indignant, raising my hands. "We tried. But then she bought me ice cream, so everything's fair," Ben added, shrugging his shoulders, as if that finally put the finishing touches on everything. I felt the tension in the room begin to rise, like a cool breeze coming through a cracked window. Emily listened to their enthusiastic stories, but there was no joy in her gaze. She crossed her arms over her chest, narrowed her eyes, and slowly turned her eyes to me. "Girlfriend," she asked. Her voice sounded even, but there was clearly something else in it. I nodded calmly. "Yes." Emily raised an eyebrow, as if waiting for details. "And who is she?" I smiled widely. "Would you like me to introduce you?" Emily nodded. Genuine curiosity was visible in her eyes. We left the house. As we approached the car, he turned, opened the door, and motioned for Rachel to get out. She silently got out of the car. Her posture was straight, her gaze was calm. The light of the lantern reflected softly in her hair. Her movements had the lightness of a person who is not going to make excuses and does not see the need for it. I looked at Emily. "Emily, meet me," I said in an even voice. "This is Rachel. You ought to see her face at this moment."